What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi. Welcome to another Datasheet Deep Dive. This is the video series where we take a datasheet in Warhammer 40k and dive into it in excruciating detail. And today we're going to be talking about one of the wackiest aircraft in Warhammer 40k, and probably the game's strongest aircraft datasheet, at least at the time of recording. And that is the Tau Tigershark. Now, the Tigershark actually comes in two variants, the classic Tigershark and the Tigershark AX10. And today we're going to be talking about each of those datasheets, comparing the two, and as always, some synergies, the expected damage from these things, which is absolutely insane, as well as many of their core mechanics, synergies, and how you can defeat them on the tabletop. Now, a couple of mechanics that we should talk about first and foremost. These are aircraft units, so they follow all of the aircraft mechanics inside the core rulebook. Now, I have a whole ridiculous rules video on how aircraft work and all of the minute details of their mechanics, but there are some important ones to talk about with the Tigershark specifically. First of all, they are an enormously powerful range platform. So the fact that they use the aircraft visibility rules, namely the fact that ruins are treated as only true line of sight blocking both to and from them. So you have to actually physically be behind a vertical element of the terrain in order for line of sight to be blocked from you. If you are simply behind the template of the terrain that would normally block line of sight to ground-based units, that doesn't protect you from the Tigershark. But similarly, the Tigershark can't claim line of sight blocking from ruins either. Instead, if you have a solid wall or another object that is totally blocking the line of sight traced between the two models, you would be blocked. But otherwise, that Tigershark is going to see you and you're going to be able to see it. That's enormous for the alpha strike that these things can potentially provide. In addition, aircraft don't start deployed on the tabletop like other units. Instead, they must start the game in a special kind of reserve that then moves to strategic reserve once the game begins. This means a couple different things. First off, you're not going to get these guys as gun platforms in the first battle round of the game. In addition, because they are a weird form of reserves, they actually start the game in normal reserve, which counts towards the 50% army cap of units you can have in normal reserve, but doesn't count against your cap of strategic reserves. They then, once the game begins, arrive using the strategic reserve mechanics. This means they have to come in 6 inches off a table edge, and because the Tigershark in particular is such a large model and is mounted on a 160mm round base, it is actually too large to set up within that distance normally. Now, this means it's forced to set up in base contact with your own table edge because it uses the large model deployment rules, but thanks to the June update and a little bit of a weird FAQ that was included in that, it can actually operate normally once it's arrived on the table. Now, on top of that, the Tigershark is also governed by the aircraft movement rules, meaning that it travels in straight lines and then pivots at the end of its movement, but can move any distance as long as it travels at least 20 inches from its starting position. So even in instances where you're able to protect yourself from these things when they are set up on the battlefield, it can move out to find you later on. Now, with all that out of the way, let's talk about the actual profile of the Tigershark. These things are extremely tanky heavy vehicles, coming in at an impressive toughness of 11 with 18 wounds. Despite this, they have mediocre safe profiles, which does mean that with concentrated fire they can go down, and pretty average leadership, as well as the classic objective control value of 0 that basically all aircraft in the game have. Now, on top of that, they mount insane armament. Both varieties of the Tigershark mount some form of twin heavy cannons plus 2 wing mounted weapons, either burst cannons or cyclic ion blasters, but to be honest, you'll probably always take cyclic. They trade one shot for substantially better profiles. In addition, they can mount up to 6 seeker missiles as well as 2 missile pods. The standard Tigershark also gets 2 anti-fly blast missile racks, which are good for both anti-fly duties but also good at clearing out infantry when they need them to. Now, the biggest difference between the profiles is the heavy cannon armament as well as their special ability. The Tigershark AX10 gets a one-shot twin-linked heavy railgun that, thanks to their special ability, is anti-Titan within 60 inches. This is amazing to trigger its devastating wounds. It's able to get those devastating wounds on a 3+, and with the twin-linked keyword, it gets to reroll those, but it doesn't actually really need the twin-linked keyword in order to wound normally, since it comes in at a ridiculous strength of 26, so you're almost always wounding naturally. The downside here is that it isn't only a single attack, and since it's coming in at 12 damage, most of the Titan units it's going to be trying to hunt are going to take a hit from that but not go down. If you combine that with all of its missile racks, it will be able to put a dent into those heavy targets, but compared to the standard Tigershark, it pales in the comparison because the standard Tigershark is mounting 2 railguns instead of 1. So the actual damage output, considering its lower attack volume, is actually not that great, especially when you consider some of the synergies that we'll discuss later on in this video. Now, the standard Tigershark can choose between a pair of railguns, ion cannons, or an interesting 6 16-shot Strength 6 EP1 burst cannon profile. The first two options are the most exciting. I don't know if Tau are really hurting for high volume, like mid-strength, low AP weapons. They sort of have that coming out their ears. However, getting 2 railguns on a single platform is amazing, and that's mostly the loadout that I'm going to be discussing in this video. The railguns are Swift Strike railguns, so they're a similar profile to the railgun mounted on the Hammerhead gunship, coming in at a massive strength of 20, AP5, and D6 plus 6 damage with the potential devastating wounds. And obviously because it mounts 2 of them, it gets 2 shots rather than the single twin link shot of the Tigershark AX-10. As I mentioned before, this Tigershark also gets its anti-fly missile racks, alongside an ability to inflict battle shock on an enemy that it hits. This is interesting if it splits its fire and shoots some of its smaller guns like those missile racks or cyclic ion blasters, or even missile pods at another target that you're trying to battle shock to prevent them from using defensive stratagems in the future, or prevent you from scoring your objectives. When combined with other battle shock effects like piranhas, you can actually overload targets' abilities to sustain multiple battle shock checks and reduce them to OC0. Although doing so inside the shooting phase isn't the most useful thing in the world, so this ability is not incredible. Not to mention the fact that it also doesn't work against flying units, so randomly there will be some stuff that you're not able to battle shock at all. Now the awkward part is splitting that fire. When these guys are guided, their damage output skyrockets through the roof, and while the combination of multiple heavy guns, especially on the standard Tigershark, alongside multiple seeker missiles makes guiding them incredibly efficient, whereas taking a similar number of hammerheads or Skyray gunships, for example, would actually force you to split your powerful guiding units between multiples, and the Tigershark can concentrate that guidance effect on a single model, which makes your army tend to work more efficiently. They do have some weapon profiles that are better against lighter targets, and splitting them obviously is less effective than it would be otherwise. Although I think that is a small price to pay for the ability to guide multiple railgun profiles with a single guiding unit. Now with that, we can talk about some other datasheet synergies, and to be honest, there aren't too many of those within the codex because this is an independent vehicle datasheet. But the big benefits that we want to get on these guys is bonuses to hit, and especially bonuses when they're guided. Commander Shadowsun's worth mentioning here. She can give you reroll hit rolls of 1 even when you're not guided within 6 inches of her, and when you use some powerful stratagems on these things, you also have the opportunity to regen command points, which is obviously pretty strong. The big winner here, however, are stealth battlesuits. They have the forward observer's ability to give reroll hit rolls and wound rolls of 1 when they guide for a unit and the guided unit attacks their target. They can also equip a marker drone, so that guidance also benefits from ignore cover that the marker drone gives them. And because the stealth battlesuits themselves forward operate, they normally have the best opportunity to get into position to spot the units that the Tigershark really wants to be hitting, which is the most heavily armored stuff in your opponent's army that they can just rip apart with their railguns. Now with that all being said, let's talk about some detachment synergies to use with these guys. Unfortunately for Tau, most of their detachments are keyed towards specific unit types, and the Tigersharks lack the keywords for things like the Crude Hunting Pack and the Retaliation Conjura. However, the Monka detachment does have some bonuses for them. They can get +1 AP on their guns, which is pretty strong from focused fire, especially if you're running ion cannon versions of the Tigershark. Those weapons tend to have a middling AP, and being able to stack multiple of them and make more efficient use of that stratagem is pretty solid. Counterfire defense is also good for these guys because it makes them extremely tanky. However, the detachment ability is less exciting. Lethal hits is fine, not good if you're running the rail cannon versions because their strength value is typically so high that you don't really need the additional bonus to wound, and they can't gain devastating wounds when you roll a lethal hit, which is a little bit of anti-synergy. In addition, Monka only works in the first 3 battle rounds of the game, and since the Tigershark is going to be taking at least one of those battle rounds off, you actually get less use out of this effect than you would normally. Although, like I said, the ability to concentrate multiple big heavy weapon platforms onto a single target and then affect them with their stratagems is already good, so ion cannon varieties of the Tigershark might be okay in a Monka detachment like this. However, taking them on more classic platforms like hammerheads may just be the way to go. Now, the one last synergy that Monka has with this thing is Strategic Conquer, and it's like a bit of a funny one. This allows you to choose an objective before the first turn begins, and while the bearers on the battlefield give your units an additional objective control bonus when in range of that objective marker, this actually allows the Tigersharks to potentially score objectives at some point during the game, since it makes them OC1, meaning in very specific situations they can actually hold objectives and also perform actions, which is kind of funny. How often this matters because it is a very specific portion of the table, and aircraft are typically moving too fast in order to stay in a particular area for too long, but it is a funny synergy to keep in mind. Moving on, however, we have the Kaoyan detachment, and this is the real deal. This is probably mostly where Tigersharks are going to be played. The Kaoyan ability has later ability activation. It works in the final 3 battle rounds of the game instead of the first 3 battle rounds of the game, which means it's better for aircraft that are arriving later. And the heavy guns are much better with sustained hits rather than lethals. Getting a sustained hit or even 2 sustained hits off of a railgun shot is so much more value than getting a lethal hit off of that railgun shot. You are multiplying your damage rather than simply cementing your damage. And when you combo this with effects like hit rerolls and guidance, the damage output of these big heavy guns are enormous. On top of that, you can also use Tempting Trap and Point Blank Ambush to get a little bit of a wound bonus, and you can use Wall of Mirrors to redeploy your stealth battlesuits. We just talked about how synergistic the stealth battlesuit is with, to be fair, everything in the Tau Codex essentially, but especially with these huge heavy weapon platforms like the Tigershark, and being able to place those things in strategic reserve and drop them off in positions where you can get line of sight to their most valuable stuff allows you to redeploy these guys in places where they can guide for the Tigersharks, which can then blow them away. Now, exactly how much do they blow them away? Let's talk about some average damage from the railgun equipped Tigershark under the effects of Kaoyan. So we're going to assume that a Tigershark is being guided by a stealth battlesuit team to give it reroll 1s to hit and wound, +1 to hit and ignore cover. Under the effects of the Kaoyan detachment ability, when you're guided, you get sustained hits 2, which in combination with the +1 to hit essentially gives you a full conversion on your hit rolls on average. Obviously, this is incredibly spiky, but taken over a large enough sample size, you should just about get equal successful hits thanks to the sustain 2 as you put in attacks. Once you add a reroll on top of that, your expected output is higher than your input attacks. You're expecting around 1.17 hits per shot. Those are AP5 and ignore cover, so assuming we're attacking a 2+ save unit with no other defensive mechanics available to it, things like Armor of Contempt and Invulnerable saves can throw a wrench in the works, but let's just say that we're shooting at a Land Raider that does not have Armor of Contempt active on it, meaning that it's not going to be able to save against this attack at all. With those wound rerolls, you're expecting somewhere around 0.78 wounds per hit, and calculating that into your average damage, you're expecting somewhere around 7.4 average damage per hit. That's d6 plus 3 damage multiplied by the number of wounds per hit that you expect. This means that 2 railgun shots averaging 2.34 hits converts into 17.29 average damage against a 2+ save that it's wounding on 3s. Obviously, the devastating wounds in this case won't matter because we're punching through their armor save anyway, but the devastating wounds do give you a little bit of the ability to fight around Armor of Contempt, high armor save, or invulnerable save effects. Now on top of that, we also have 2 cyclic ion blasters, a missile pod, as well as the anti-fly missiles on the bottom of the Tigershark. These can expect an extra 4.7 damage, assuming that your target is toughness 12, for a total average damage of 21.9, enough to dumpster basically any vehicle in 40k, at least in the Strike Force game size. This gets absolutely ludicrous when combined with the fact that the Tigershark has 6 Seeker missiles, which by themselves average an additional 16.38 damage into a similar target. Now the awkward part here is that this is for a total of 38.3 damage in that single spike if you were to expend all 6 Seekers on a single target, which is honestly kind of unnecessary. Now this is where the awkward inability to split fire does become a little bit of a problem for the Tigershark. This is assuming that you're dumping all of their attacks into a single target, and if they are protected by invulnerable saves, so something like a Knight. However, you don't really have the opportunity to split this against 2 separate targets, either all the standard guns or all of the Seeker missiles, to basically kill a Land Raider in either direction, but your damage output drops precipitously if either of those targets are not guided, and if you are splitting fire while being guided. So this damage doesn't really get spread out amongst your opponent's army. This is another awkward anti-synergy with their battle shock forcing rule. You want to be splitting 1 or 2 guns off in order to force those battle shock checks on a second target, because the first target is probably gonna be dead, but in doing so you actually have kind of a low chance of actually connecting on that second target with your shots. Now that damage sounds absolutely ludicrous, and for the points cost that the Tigershark is currently listed at is an absolute steal. So let's talk about actually defeating these guys. Now there aren't too many concrete ways to defend them. Because the Tigersharks are aircraft and ignore most line of sight blockers in 40k, because they ignore ruined templates for the purposes of line of sight blocking and only care about the physical vertical terrain itself, and since they start the game off the table, there's nothing really you can do to them before they get the opportunity to attack you. Essentially the counterplay comes from either hiding behind true line of sight blockers, preventing the Tigersharks from assembling all of their support abilities, or simply killing enough of the Tau army before the Tiger Sharks arrive that the Tiger Sharks themselves aren't going to do enough damage to you. Now, that in and of itself is very difficult because Tau can play a relatively cagey game plan, and with a massive number of ranged attacks, they can punish enemies that are pushing up the table without trying to hide behind line of sight blockers. That said, there are a couple important idiosyncrasies of the Tiger Shark to keep in mind. The first off is that they, again, like I mentioned before, don't ignore true line of sight blocking terrain. So depending on the type of terrain that you are playing on, if you have large walls or other edifices that you can hide your models behind, the Tiger Shark isn't necessarily going to get line of sight on the turn that it arrives. On top of that, they can only come from their own board edge, so if you have large buildings or something that are facing that board edge, your guys can hide in it with impunity without the Tiger Shark being able to interact with them once they come in. Obviously, keep in mind that this is true line of sight based, and the Tiger Shark is a physically enormous model, so it might be a little harder for you to block line of sight to the models in question from your opponent's entire board edge, but it is still a possibility. The Tiger Shark's also super tall, so if the ruins that you're using have a lot of windows in them, especially on the second or third floors, there is the opportunity for the Tiger Shark to angle its line of sight through those windows in order to see you regardless. Basically, use good terrain with lots of solid walls and line of sight blocking elements, and that will make this unit slightly less powerful. On top of that, their damage output is highly reliant on spotters. If you kill their guiding units or you don't allow yourself to be spotted against, these guys do way less damage, somewhere around literally half of the expected damage if they aren't benefiting from the rerolls from Stealth Battlesuit as well as the enhanced version of the Kauyon Detachment ability. This can be done with ruin terrain since you still need line of sight to the target in order to guide against it, meaning that these smaller units that don't innately ignore ruin templates will still have to see you, and if you can protect yourself from Stealth Battlesuits or other similar powerful guiding units from getting line of sight to you, even if the Tiger Shark can see you, it isn't necessarily going to be as effective as the simulation that we just ran through. In addition, all of this can potentially be screened. If you are aggressive enough, you can stop the Tiger Sharks from setting up in particular areas of your opponent's table edge, and that makes it much easier to control where they set up on the battlefield and where they're able to hit you when they come in on turn 3 or so. In addition, aggressive screening can also block off Wall of Mirrors from getting those spotting units in from strategic reserve to get line of sight to the units that you don't want to be spotted. Now, the larger, heavier stuff that the Tiger Sharks really prey on is going to have a tough time surviving these things once they are set up on the table, and they are the most difficult stuff to protect from the Tiger Sharks. So those units are the ones that you will typically try to run into your opponent and deal massive damage with before the Tiger Sharks arrive and all of their Kauyon synergies turn on. If you can do so, you can push the Tau player off of the scenario to the point that even the existence of aircraft that can do insane damage to them are not enough to win them the game, and that is the platonic ideal, since it is important to remember that the Tiger Sharks themselves don't actually do anything once they arrive in terms of the mission. They can't complete most maneuver secondaries and can't perform actions, and also can't even hold objectives themselves, outside of the one synergy with Strategic Conqueror that we discussed previously. Using strategic reserves is also particularly important here. If you can wait out the Tiger Sharks and hold your units in strategic reserve or in deep strike until the Tiger Sharks arrive, you can then potentially counter deploy them in a position where they can't be shot at. It is a little bit tough in 10th edition, however, since even if the Tiger Shark player is going first, they can actually hold their units past their third turn and use rapid ingress to bring them in at the bottom of the third round after all of the second player's reserves have been forced to arrive. And with that, that's all I have to say about the Tiger Shark and the Tigershark AX-10. Let me know down in the comment section what you think about these aircraft and the ways to potentially defeat them. Big thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks to everybody who supports the channel, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing, and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.